everyone to GeoHug. I'm really excited for this session. It's going to be a lot of fun and mind-bending with the amazing Dr. Hayden Mort. So Hayden's a geologist, an oceanographer, and geochemist. And just before lockdown, he founded his company, Geologize, that seeks to inspire and engage the public whilst training other geoscientists to do the same. And we actually have a few passes up for grabs in today's session for his renowned practical geocommunications course. So get ready for that. But yes, thank you so much, Hayden, for joining us today. It's an absolute pleasure having you.
It's awesome to be here. It's really a pleasure. I've been wanting to do this talk for a long time. I'm going to share my screen now and we'll kick things off. For about 5 years, I've been wanting to do this talk. And so I want to talk about how the Earth's history has actually affected our minds. And before I get into that, I just wanted to explain to you why very, very quickly. Before I started my training course, I was kind of doing social media. And you'll see here a bewildering array of subjects that I've been like tucking into, essentially, and trying to connect the geosciences to things that people like in their everyday lives. Because I understand that I can't sell geoscience to somebody who doesn't care about geoscience, because that's the way we normally do it. Yeah, so I went and geologized wine, salt, social inequality, some candy in the UK, fruit pastels, miracles, Shakespeare, roundabouts, even Donald Trump. I kind of realized that, this is great. It's getting a lot of engagement and people really, really like it. Even geologists like it because they get to show their friends about, how their everyday world is connected to the geosciences. But I wanted something which is the broadest possible appeal. What thing does every single person on the planet have? Which they all share, that I can connect with the geosciences, because surely if I can identify that, then I'll be able to appeal to the maximum number of people in just one go. And then I suddenly realized the answer is pretty obvious, isn't it? It's that is it. What I was thinking. It is thinking. That is what we all do. Yeah. So our minds, our thoughts, our words, when we're not saying them, that is the most personal thing that we all have in common. Doesn't matter what language you speak. Our consciousness, essentially, is what I'm talking about, is what we have in common. So what if I can link that, right, to the geosciences? Wouldn't that be a bit of a mind-bending thing to do? I'm a big advocate of actually presenting the conclusion before anything else. This is my thesis, so to speak. The way you think and feel is influenced by natural events that happened hundreds, thousands, even millions of years ago, before Homo sapiens were even a species. Okay, let that sink in for a minute. Now, let's start with this really interesting quote that I picked up from Steven Pinker. He says, language surely does affect our thoughts, rather than just labeling them for the sake of labeling them. Most obviously, language is the conduit through which people share their thoughts and intentions and thereby acquire the knowledge, customs, values of those around them. Okay, so it's actually really, really important for our society that we speak, obviously. Language is universal. It seems to be very, very developed in the human species. So I just think words and feelings, the words that I'm enunciating, the vibrations going through my microphone, through the ether and coming out of your speakers, these words affect people's minds, right? They affect the way you feel, don't they? So let's say, but that's a theoretical question. Would you feel something less strongly if you didn't have a word for it? Yeah. If you just didn't have a word for, let's say indignation, if that word just didn't exist for some reason, what would you actually feel and how would you transmit that feeling to somebody else, right? It's actually a pretty sticky question. You can't really, there's no simple answer to that. But the way that we feel, the way we have that internal conversation is molded, is shaped, is crystallized around the words that we have at our disposal. That is to say, our lexicon, so to speak. Now, if that lexicon is influenced by natural events, then we have some really interesting stories to tell. So this is the composition, mostly, of modern English. And as you can see, that a large proportion of it is Latin. And Latin via French, especially. We just don't pronounce it in the same way. The rest of it is Germanic languages, such as Anglo-Saxon languages like Flemish, and also Old Norse from the Vikings, Greek, other, and we have place names making up a minority there. So that's interesting. And if you think about it, it makes a big difference to the way you communicate, the way you feel, right? So, for example, do you end a meeting or do you conclude a meeting? Yeah. The word that you choose carries a certain sensibility, carries a certain, difference in feeling. It means the same thing, but we use conclude as a more formal way of saying that, don't we? And it has a certain different feeling towards it. Yeah. Do you start or initiate a project? Do you give or offer advice? Do you get or obtain information? Do you go berserk, or do you go furious or get furious? Do you ransack or plunder? Not that you do, but the words, let's go like berserk, which is Old Norse, which is Viking, and furious, which is French, Latin. Yeah, they mean basically the same thing, but we have a different concept in our mind about what would going berserk involve. Going furious. Berserk is like going around like a headless chicken and going really, really crazy. And furious is just like very, very, very angry. These words come from different roots. So end is Germanic and conclude is French. Same with start and initiate. And then ransack is Norse and plunder is German. Yeah, well, we have at our disposal in English various forms of saying essentially the same thing, yet they transmit slightly different emotions. Okay, I think this isn't controversial, whatsoever. Really, what I'm saying. So, but that we take that for granted, don't we? Yeah, I'm going to use English particularly in this webinar, but you could do this for any language because every language is a mishmash of languages gone before, centuries gone by. So you've got a choice. You have a choice when you use a word, which word you use, depending on the context and the feeling you want to transmit. But what if those choices were defined by natural events? That would be something, wouldn't it? That would be like, what the heck? How is this possible? Millions of years ago? Give me a break. All right. I'm going to show you how this works. I want to tell you 3 what I consider to be pretty incredible stories about, that have actually changed the course of our language and therefore changed the way we think modern English today. And as I said, this could be done for any language. So we're going to start in Norway. And if you've been to Norway, majestic environment, glaciated, periglaciated landscape, absolutely stunning. And we get a lot of old words from Old Norse. Here's just a few of them. You've got irk, like, look at these words and you just get a feeling about the feelings that each of these words actually like conveys or, stirs within you. And you're like, irk, likely, gift, same, berserk, club, ransack, slaughter, scathe, gun, heathen, husband, bylaw, gawk, bask, anger, skill, haggle, dirt, mire, muck, rotten. And these are most of the salt of the earth words, words which really have a strong connection with humanity and what it means to be human, sometimes not the best parts of us. These are all words that come from Old Norse, as the Vikings used to speak. We just take advantage of these words and we just take them for granted. Norway was glaciated during the last ice age, and in fact, if you go to Norway, you'll see that there's a very, very thin layer of topsoil. And that's simply because as the glaciers came down from the Arctic, they kind of were bulldozed. They literally bulldozed all the soil in front of them like this. And you can see this as the extent of the last glacial maximum around about 20,000 years ago. So you can see that in Norway, they had a bit of a hard time. Yeah. The soil had been stripped off the land, essentially. And this caused problems because as the climate warmed after the last ice age, their populations grew. And we know that these ice ages come and go as a result of Milankovitch cycles. These variations of the Earth's orbit around the sun, they actually influence the periodicity of the glaciations over the past million years or so, the Quaternary. So especially the eccentricity cycle. So the way it works is this. You get poor topsoil, you actually got starvation in Old Norse country as the climate warmed and the Norse population expanded. They literally didn't have enough fertile soil to sustain their very rapidly expanding populations. And as a result of that, they developed a conquering mentality. That is why they set sail. That is why they came to England, and they saw the southern part of England had a very fertile soil, and they wanted a piece of that, not simply because they were just marauding barbarians, which they had become, but because they actually needed that to sustain their people. So all these words which are popping up on your screen right now, they come from Old Norse, and we use them all the time. And for me, it is just incredible that this has happened, that we use these words on a day-by-day basis, basically because of natural events, thousands of years ago. The next one we have is French, but it's actually really, really fascinating because this one is about how natural events essentially saved the English language and added a bunch of words in the process. Many of you may not know, because obviously why would you, because you're geologists, not historians, but French was actually the de facto language in England for about 1066, the Battle of Hastings, the Norman invasion, until 1413. So that's over 300 years. French language was the language of royalty, the aristocracy, the upper class, parliament, laws, trials, and even the jurors had to speak French. The common people had to speak French to understand the arguments of the prosecution and defense. It's pretty crazy to think about that. But that actually had an inevitable influence on the English language because it meant that we were gradually incorporating these words. That's why we say words like initiation, conclusion, execution, chauffeur, cul-de-sac, all kinds of French words. So these are the ones. I mean, look at all these words. I mean, you'd be forgiven to thinking that first line there is actually English, but they're actually all French words, every single one of them. Isn't that incredible? There is the one I said about before, indignation, apéritif, connoisseur, déjà vu. And then you can see from a lot of these words that they are kind of slightly more upper class. Yeah. We don't say these on a day-by-day basis, but they are absolutely part of our lexicon. And when we hear those words and we say those words, it influences the way we think and feel. There's no question about that. Don't think that you don't speak French, because if I ask you, parlez-vous français, it is true. You do. You do speak an enormous amount of French. I would say at least a third of your language is French, which is an amazing part of it. I just want to emphasize that English, looking at this pie chart here, it actually could have died out. If the Normans weren't kicked out and sent packing back to France, this was being squeezed. This Germanic Old English root was being squeezed all the time that for 300 years. And if it wasn't for something to do with solar radiation and climate change, then we would probably be all speaking French right now. Let me explain. Round about just after the medieval warm period, there was a drying of the Asian subcontinent. This is a pretty poor graph here. If you want to dig up the actual paper, it's here. But around about 1330, there was a significant drying here, a drying of the climate. Okay, just ignore this one. This is in Oman. But the rest of them, they all come from central China. During this period, central China was starting to dry significantly, and that was having a large impact on the ecosystem there. To the extent the cause of that has been pretty well established: a decrease in solar radiation and a corresponding decrease in the intensity of the Asian monsoons, and that's one of the main causes. It dries. If you don't have the monsoons, you don't have the wet weather bringing seasonal rainfall. So that affected the biodiversity significantly. And it caused species migration. So I want you to meet these two guys. They are bed buddies. We have the oriental rat flea carrying Yersinia pestis bacterium. And we have a rat from the central China. And this guy here, this is Yersinia pestis. It lives in the rat flea. So the flea lives on the rat, and inside the flea lives this bacteria, Yersinia pestis, otherwise known as the bubonic plague. And the bubonic plague did not start in Europe. It started in China. So we have this situation where, because of a natural event causing a drying out of the climate in the Asian subcontinent, an extraordinary series of events happening which devastated Europe. Yeah, we have rats migrating from central China to the coast. They hitch a ride to Europe on the European vessels carrying herbs and spices, the spice trade, and the bubonic plague arriving several months later, called the Black Death, killed at least 50% of all Europeans. But the question is, who did they affect the most? If you think about it, did they affect these guys or these guys, French or the English speakers? Well, the answer is actually the French speakers. It's the aristocracy, because they lived in close proximity to each other in their ivory towers, so to speak. They had a weaker immune system. And they were there. They were hit way, way more badly than these guys, the peasants, so to speak, who toiled the fields every day, who naturally had a stronger immune system, lived in more rural, more dispersed communities, so transmission was a bit lower. And so it was the French speakers who were actually hit way harder than the English speakers. And as a result of that, the old Anglo-Saxon armies and those with allegiance to them, they got the upper hand. So in the Battle of Pontiac in 1356, and they actually captured the King of France, John II, England, or the Old English, started to turn the tide, and as a result, saved the English language. But that wouldn't have happened. It's crazy to think about it, but that wouldn't have happened if there weren't a drying or a decrease in the intensity of the Asian monsoons as a result of solar radiation. So this is just, pretty deterministic, I grant you, but not controversial, that if it wasn't for natural events, that series of events which decimated the French-speaking population and weakened them, that would have meant that we could be speaking French today. It's a high possibility. Take-home message from this little mini story: English emerged radically different and enriched after 300 years of French influence. The way we think and feel has certainly changed and evolved as a result of incorporating the French language into English. But it emerged thanks to changes in solar radiation and climate changes in Asia, which I think is pretty darn cool. We can't go without talking about this dude here, Shakespeare. Now, if you're like me, I just didn't really get Shakespeare at school. Very hard to understand. And but now I've actually come to realize, doing the research, that he did change English radically. And so if we can link him to geology, wouldn't that be cool? This was a challenge. But some phrases that you probably have heard from Shakespeare are here: knock, knock, who's there? All our yesterdays, be all and end all, beggars all description, brave new world, breaking the ice, refuse to nudge, budge an inch, catch a cold, cold comfort, eat me out of house and home. Just go on. All of those, Shakespeare invented them through his various works. So, what's going on here? Why is this such a big deal? Okay, yeah, we use all these expressions and a whole lot more, but the fact is that he was a master of these literary tools. That's what metaphor, analogy, simile, especially hyperbole, allusion, euphemism, oxymoron. He was master at that. Some of these things didn't really exist before him, others did, but he actually brought them into popular use. He made them absolutely mainstream. He changed the habit of the English language. And many of those expressions that I showed you on the previous page were adopted in other languages too. So it's not just an English influence. Heart of Gold, I know a couple of languages, and I know that many of these are translated into those languages too. So he changed our relationship with English, and therefore changed how we transmit emotion and create new feelings as a result of that. How can we geologize Shakespeare? How can we do this? I was a little bit lost when I started to do this, but I thought I got to do it. I'm going to tell this story. So I did some digging and I found out something really cool. Well, Shakespeare's got something in common with all these people, because celebrities, and Shakespeare was a celebrity back in his time, celebrities need a lucky break. I mean, all celebrities do. I mean, these celebrities here have a particularly cool lucky break story, but Shakespeare was no different. Before one particular play that I'll show you in a minute, he was just knocking around. He didn't really have any successes. This all changed thanks to carbonate platforms, guys. Seriously, no, not just any carbonate platform, but a particular one, a Jurassic carbonate platform in the Arabian Peninsula and the Mediterranean. Okay, so this particular carbonate platform actually gave rise to Shakespeare. I can't believe I'm saying this, but it's true. He actually created this story in 1593 called Venus and Adonis, and it was a hit. This is the thing that launched, and you probably never heard of it, but this is the thing that launched Shakespeare onto the national stage in England, because it was raunchy, it was gossipy, it was, as I said, soap opera, and this was very common back then, it was plagiarized. Not word for word, but this was very common back then because it was actually inspired by a Greek story, a Greek myth called Aphrodite and Adonis. There's no question, if Aphrodite and Adonis didn't exist, Shakespeare wouldn't have got his lucky break. Okay, let's just bear that in mind. In Aphrodite and Adonis, Aphrodite, the goddess of love, turned Mira, who was very much more beautiful than she was, apparently. In her jealousy, the god turned Mira into a myrrh tree. Now, a myrrh tree, I beg your pardon. Now, myrrh, you probably heard of myrrh, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. The sap of the tree is used for various ritualistic, processes associated with death. But myrrh trees are very, very, very specific to the Arabian Peninsula and the Mediterranean. And the reason for that is because there is so much carbonate around. It loves to grow in carbonate soils. If it wasn't for the carbonate, if it wasn't for the semi-arid, if it wasn't for the carbonaceous soils and its ubiquitous distribution over the Mediterranean and Middle East due to Jurassic carbonate sedimentation, myrrh trees just would not be there. It wouldn't exist, okay? And as a result of this 150 million year old Tithonian limestone, you wouldn't have the myrrh tree. And without the myrrh tree, you wouldn't have this Greek myth. And without the Greek myth, Shakespeare would not have got his lucky break, and we would be losing a whole bunch of words and expressions and linguistic tools that we take for granted today that generate thoughts and emotions. It is amazing to think that 150 million years ago, that has actually influenced the way we think today. But it is a logical conclusion that you can draw from that. Many linguistic tools, just to summarize this part of the talk, and expressions that we take for granted today may never have arisen without Jurassic carbonate platform sedimentation. I've told 3 stories: Old Norse, glaciation, climate change, French, and carbonate sedimentation and Shakespeare. All of these, and there are many other stories that I don't have time to fit them in really. All of these have radically influenced the way we think. So yes, as geologists, we always bang on about, how we're dependent on natural resources, oil and gas, plastics, wood, and water, and the world. Of course, we know we consider ourselves to be stewards of the planet, etc. We are dependent on these things. But with this talk, I want to go a bit deeper. I want to suggest that we are people of the planet, because in the very most important sense of who we are, which is our very thoughts and our very consciousness, the Earth's history has influenced us in our language and our minds. So what you're thinking right now, as you're listening to me, what you're thinking, you're reflecting and stuff, that has been bequeathed to you through a myriad of geoscientific, geological coincidences that have unfolded over time. And I think for me, that's touching. That's amazing. That makes me feel humbled that I am a person of the planet, so to speak. I hope you've enjoyed it. That is a wrap from me. That is Geologize, connecting you with the planet in unexpected ways.
That was so cool. So thank you very much for sharing that with us.